Welcome to Torah Smash, the podcast for nerdy Jews, where our lives of Jewish learning collide with our love of nerd culture. In each episode, we discuss what we lovingly call a Torah Smash, which we have defined as a beautiful collision of one thing from the world of Judaism with another from nerd culture. I am RDY, and joining me today are
Barak Malkin,
Ethan Lane Miller,
Rabbi Ben Sharff.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages, our guest for today's episode is Rabbi Ben Sharff. Rabbi Benjamin Sharff serves as the senior rabbi for Temple Israel in Omaha, Nebraska. Before that, he served pulpits in Rockland, New York, Baltimore, Maryland, and Tucson, Arizona. Ben received his bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin before being ordained at HUC JIR in 2004. He plays both rhythm and lead guitar in a variety of worship bands and garage bands that he has been involved with over the years. Ben grew up in Houston, Texas, and was a camper and later counselor, unit head, song leader, lifeguard, and educator at URJ's Green Family Camp. Having grown up watching the likes of Looney Tunes and Mel Brooks, Ben developed an irreverent sense of humor. Ben loves both Star Wars and Star Trek, and he blew most of his bar mitzvah money on comic books, including the famous Death of Superman in Superman number 75 and Amazing Spider-Man number 300, which introduced the character of Venom. Ben plays in an ongoing D&D campaign with the greatest dungeon master in the world. He also serves as the editor for the comic book Siddur, created by Howard Salmon of blessed memory. Ben is married to Joy and the proud father of 3, including their youngest, who is now addicted to Star Trek: The Next Generation. Welcome, Ben.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Always happy to have more Texans on the podcast.
I thought you were going to say more Trekking.
I guess it makes you both Trexans.
Yes.
Well, before we get into today's topic, I want to remind all of our listeners to mark your calendars and get ready, because coming this January to Chicago is Torah Smash Live. Barak, Ethan, and I are going to be in the same zip code for the first time ever, and we will be recording a live episode, and you are all invited to join. Saturday, January 13th, 2024, at KAM Isaiah Israel in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago. For more details on this event, go to torahsmash.com/live. Come to nerd out with us and be a part of Jewish history. So excited for this.
Very fun.
All right, take it away, Ben.
I am so thrilled to be here with you guys. I was thinking about my opening, and I just have to say, long-time listener, first-time caller.
I thought your opening was going to be like the 4 of us on a couch.
Still working on that couch gag. Speaking of which, so for today's Smash, I thought I would bring up one of my favorite television shows, The Simpsons. Co-created by Matt Groening back in 1987 for The Tracy Ullman Show. Matt was approached by producer James L. Brooks to create something brief for the show. And initially, he, being a cartoonist, wanted to base it off his Life in Hell comic book series. But what happened is he realized if he created it and they took the rights of it, he would never have control over his own product. So instead, inspired by his hometown of Portland and his own family, he came up with the characters of The Simpsons, which premiered in 87 and then became its own show in 1989. Now, what's really fascinating about it is that it's been around for 35 years. And so it is so ubiquitous that folks in their early 40s have never known a time without The Simpsons. So much so that if you look at it, the writers and producers creating the show grew up on it, and it's sort of become a parody of itself in some ways. And because of it, we've completely forgotten how revolutionary the show was. For example, there are people who speculate that The Simpsons basically got rid of the laugh track. It led to many of the shows that we know today, like The Office and Park and Rec and so many more, that you don't have a live studio audience. And of course, it influenced later cartoons like South Park and Family Guy, Bob's Burgers and Rick and Morty. But the thing that I would argue that's most important about it is it was coming out of a time of, and I hate to mention the name, but I feel compelled to do so, shows like The Cosby Show and other shows like that on must-see TV, on Thursday night on NBC, Family Ties, where it was all fathers know best. And Simpson completely blew up television.
That's awesome.
And it's been around so long, we've forgotten how revolutionary it was. And so that is the hint. What is the smash based off that sort of history of The Simpsons?
Is this what it's like when y'all listen to me and my like very ephemeral out there topics?
No.
Because I don't know where to go with that.
Is this Kibud Ava'im?
I like where you're going.
And that's, sorry for Jason, that's honor your parents.
So I like where you're going with honoring your parents, and that this completely blew that out of the water, that Bart and even Lisa, who's become a much more serious character. Originally, they were much more sarcastic. I mean, we had catchphrases like "eat my shorts" and "I caramba." But no, I'm not going for Kibud Va'im. I'm thinking more about something that's been around so long that we've forgotten how revolutionary it was when it came out.
Can I?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Is it very meta that Judaism is the Simpson of religions?
In a way, yes. You're definitely going down the right track.
Part of me wants to say, we all know that like the Torah was written by people, but we weren't around for that part. And so just like the entire story of Judaism that we've all sort of grown up with, but at some point that Torah was not written. And so we don't know of time before then.
So not necessarily the Torah itself, because that's lost in the mist of history and to some degree the authors and the editors. But there are people that we know their names who helped to revolutionize the way that we do Judaism.
Yehuda Hanassi?
Exactly. Rabbinic Judaism.
Wait, Yehuda Hanassi, go ahead. What is that?
Rabbi Judah the Prince.
Who helped create the Mishnah, the foundation for Rabbinic Judaism. Everything we do as Jews today is based off the Rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, going back to Hillel and Shammai in the first century before the Common Era, the Second Temple period. But one, we're not always great about understanding the history of Rabbinic Judaism. And two, we've sort of forgotten how much it revolutionized not just Judaism, but world religion. This idea that you don't necessarily do religion in your temple, where you go to your temple and you make your sacrifice 3 times a year. That was basically it. That was all that was asked of the people. And then you get this group of intellectuals who've decided we're going to raise up a bunch of disciples, devote tremendous amounts of time to study and then applying the text to make it doable and livable, really sort of transformed the Jewish world and the religious world.
Are there shows, I think I know of one show, are there shows that have run longer than The Simpsons?
So The Simpsons is now over 750 episodes. It holds the record as the longest running animated series, the longest running sitcom, and the longest running scripted primetime series. So yes, there are, in terms of like soap operas, dramas like that. But in terms of...
I'll argue Star Trek spinoffs there.
But none of them individually have lasted that long.
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a major record holder at this point.
This is amazing. And how does it compare to the books of the Mishnah?
Well, it is just as far out there and approachable and also sometimes wacky as I would argue the books of the Mishnah.
The Mishnah.
That was
Ethan
beautiful.
for the win.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I wish I could get Sean Fogel, who made the music for this podcast, to every now and then create episode-specific music. But it's so
There's
fun.
no better episode than this one for
Oh man,
So funny.
specific music. But you know, our guest host does play guitar, so maybe he could just
You know, this Barak, this is perfect for you because one of the, at least for me, one of the first classes I took with Spurtis was, you know, basically history of Judaism. And one of the big moments that we spent a lot of time talking about was the transition from the priests to the rabbis and getting away from the temple. But some of that was due to crisis and the temple being destroyed. But it absolutely led to this revolutionary change in Judaism that I think you're right. Perhaps, at least from a modern lens, we take for granted. My organization's CEO was giving a presentation, and one of my coworkers leaned over to me really impressed. And I said, well, yeah, HUC is training modern skills, not animal sacrifice. You know, that stopped being a thing once we made the transition from priests to rabbis.
One of the things that I like to say about, the time of Yehuda Hanassi is that he was the first Reformed Jew to really take, and there were probably reforming Jews before him, but he really, I assume, identified and implemented the need for the Judaism that was no longer relevant to become relevant in his world and to modernize it and make it poignant for those people. So like you were saying with the destruction of the temple, there were factions that were arguing at the time. And one faction said the only way to be Jewish is by sacrificing at the temple. And the other faction said, no, there's this prayer stuff that we've just discovered. And we can study and pray and make that part of Judaism. And then the temple gets destroyed, and the side who said temple Judaism only automatically loses the argument. But here he was not only able to pick up the pieces and make Judaism relevant, but also throw bones to the other side to say, like, we're going to do things in this new version of our religion to make you feel welcome and to make you feel important and to know that we support your ideas, even though we disagreed with them at first. And the whole concept of machlochet b'shem shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven, is, I think, embodied in Yehuda Hanassi's building the Mishnah and throwing those bones to the other side to say, like, the hope for the temple to be rebuilt, which is in our prayer books, but it's not something I personally believe in, but that's there because, they wanted to be kind to the other side.
Do you think there's a mirror of that in The Simpsons in some way?
Well, I think the piece with regards to The Simpsons, so going back to Yehuda Hanassi and sort of the creation of rabbinic Judaism, is everything we do as Jews today, even Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, is based off their interpretive tradition. Why do we light minimum of 2 candles for Shabbat? Why 4 cups at the Passover Seder? Why 3 daily worship services? All of that was extrapolated from the broader Israelite culture, but made into something unique and special. And so when thinking about things like The Simpsons, I was reflecting on what inspired this, which was a South Park episode, which I know you guys have talked about, in an episode where Butters, one of the side characters, if you're familiar with it, this was sort of a nod and a wink by Matt Stone and Trey Parker, that Butters wanted to take over the world. And every plot he came up with was based off something that happened in The Simpsons. And all of his friends, every time he came up with this plot, his friends were like, The Simpsons did it. The Simpsons did it. And finally, it was admitted that if The Simpsons did it, then the Flintstones did it. So The Simpsons borrowed from the Flintstones, but created something unique that then influenced everything else. And so I think that's sort of the corollary to it, which is when you create something out of the cultural milieu, but also give it a unique voice, people forget just how pervasive The Simpsons was when it came out. I mean, there was Do the Bartman, which was a video on MTV back when MTV showed music videos. You
Back
could buy
still music television.
Yes, you could buy Eat My Shorts and I Caramba shirts. They were everywhere for people who grew up in the late 80s, not naming any names. And so I just envision, these early Jews studying at the yeshiva in Yavna and sort of walking around with their rabbinic equivalent of the Eat My Shorts shirts that were just popping up everywhere out of this larger cultural milieu that influenced the world in ways they didn't even really expect. For the early rabbis, this was an intellectual endeavor. They weren't expecting to take over the Jewish world, but ultimately they didn't have a choice.
Do you think they had any Eat My Mishnah swag?
Oh, absolutely.
They were really nasty to each other in wonderful ways that make our little cutting jabs seem like child's play.
But there's another piece to The Simpsons, which is it's also in many ways very Jewish. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of the writers, the producers, and even the voice artists, Julie Kavner, Marge Simpson, Hank Azaria, most known for Mo Sizlak, a character that they no longer do in Apu, and Harry Shearer, who's Mr. Burns, and Ned Flanders. And of course, the most famous Jewish character in cartoondom, Herschel Shmoykel Pinchas Yerucham Christofsky, also known as Krusty the Clown, whose father, Rabbi Hyman Christofsky, was voiced by the late, great Jackie Mason, who himself wanted to study to be a rabbi before he became a stand-up comedian.
This is
I
perfect.
believe
episode
he was
timing.
ordained as a rabbi before he became a stand-up comedian.
Well, we'll have to check that.
Okay. And also, Krusty was my number 2.
It was his number 2 pick in our episode a couple back where we did our top 5 Jewish character countdown. So if you're curious to hear who else made that list aside from Krusty Christofferson, go back. They say his name right? That's got to be wrong.
Krusty Christofferson is the
short.
like stage name,
Yeah.
so to speak, the long form of the stage name.
Yeah.
But I didn't know all the middle names. I only knew Herschel.
Yeah. And of course, one of the great episodes is where the Simpsons kids work to reunite him with his estranged father.
My son, the clown.
Yes.
You know, you had said that Simpsons had the first like dad character who wasn't everybody trusting what dad says. And it feels like that it has some basis from the Honeymooners, which then, influenced the Flintstones. So the fact that you mentioned those, but you're right. Like even those shows still had the dad is right mentality.
Yeah.
The Simpsons took those shows and completely twisted that upside down.
Absolutely.
In the Simpsons, it's Lisa is the one who needs to be trusted.
Yeah. And it was the Fathers Know Best, which came, I think, really popular in the 1950s. So, question for you. I don't know if you guys are big Simpsons fans, but even if you've had sort of nominal experience, any favorite episodes?
I always enjoy the Treehouse of Horrors. I think they're short, wonderful, creative masterpieces. So I'll just put all of them up there as they all have these really fun twists. And they're not scary. They're Treehouse of Horror, but they're like super fun.
I will say and admit those are the only episodes I have seen, so that is also my vote.
That was a really good pull. I think like Father Like Clown is my favorite. I've also seen it a dozen times because I use that episode to teach Talmud to teenagers.
Yeah, I've used Bart Sells His Soul for the similar purpose. That's a philosophical question. I think, well, going back to Treehouse of Horrors, one of my all-time favorites of all time is season 5, where they do the parody of The Shining.
Ooh,
No, that's fun.
I quote that one all the time. But I have to say, when it comes to Simpsons scholars, I think many of us agree that the best episode, which also changed the nature of The Simpsons, was the Conan O'Brien written Marge versus the Monorail. That was where he introduced a musical. It was sort of based off The Music Man. They brought in Leonard Nimoy as a voice actor, gave him really nothing useful to do whatsoever. It's where Simpsons started to go from the sort of family sitcom-esque to really sort of the sublime and the ridiculous. And it's really, they've always been, I think, in some ways trying to get back to that ever since then. If you haven't seen it, if you were to watch one Simpson episode, that is the one I recommend.
I think we also have to give a shout out to the time Fish was on The Simpsons. I think you've sent the meme to me no fewer than 6 times. So shout out to Fish. Fish, if you ever listen, we'd love to have you as a guest, all 4 of you.
Hey, speaking of Fish memes, that's one of the other beautiful things about Simpsons is you can have whole conversations just using Simpson memes. I know this because I've done it.
I think there's 2 other episodes I'll throw out that come to mind. I don't remember the whole episode, but there's like flashback storyline about Homer getting the job at the plant and slowly putting Post-its on his wall that end up changing the message that's in front of him. It starts out of like, work hard and, you're going to be here all day sort of thing. And it changes the message to do it for her. And it's for Maggie, the youngest. So as a dad now, that hits me a little different, but I always remember that one, as well as another Maggie episode, the murder of Mr. Burns, the 2-parter, this whole murder mystery about who had shot and killed Mr. Burns. And that's a really nice double episode.
And again, that shows, one, it was sort of a parody of Dallas, who shot JR, which was a cliffhanger. And two, it actually caught the imagination of the American public. And people were wondering and debating all summer, going through the clues, trying to figure out who shot Mr. Burns. And then, of course, people were so upset that they did the cheat that it was Maggie.
Oh, right.
Because everybody thought it was Waylon Smithers.
Yeah.
Which made the most sense.
Very fun.
Another thing that Simpsons has done, like Rabbinic Judaism, is it's had some spinoffs. So,
Yes.
of course, you've got Futurama, the most successful, multiply canceled cartoon outside
Is that
of
a
probably.
spin-off or just also by Matt Groening?
So David X. Cohen, the producer, was a producer on The Simpsons. So you're right, it wasn't technically a spinoff, but it was heavily influenced.
Yeah.
So it was some of his team, and they created basically The Simpsons in the future.
It's another
And
sect
then-
of Simpsons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's that recent one on Netflix. I'm blanking on the name at the moment, but Disenchanted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Disenchanted, which also is a Grenig. That one I've not been able to get into as much, but it also has his fingerprints all over it too.
It's very similar humor styles. I've watched them all. It's entertaining, but it sort of moves a little bit slower than the other ones.
Well, and I'll also say with Futurama, it has the same way that Simpsons parodies or parallels other famous works to comedic effect. Futurama does that a lot as well, to great effect.
And of course, they had the majority of the cast of the original Star Trek on.
Yeah, all the living members at the time, I believe. No, yeah, they got pretty much everybody. Yeah,
That was a shout out for Ethan. And yet it's become its own thing. It's got its own following. It's got its own merchandising. And so, yeah, in a way, like Rabbinic Judaism, it has its own offshoots and spinoffs.
well, I will say I'm a product of that. I have not seen The Simpsons. I've seen Futurama. That is one I've watched start to finish. Artie, well, I have a question related to something you brought up earlier. What do you think would change, if anything, to Judaism if the temple was magically rebuilt tomorrow?
That's a really good question. I think there are portions of Judaism that would crumple in on itself. Wow, what a great question. That was an Ethan question. I think that some sects of Judaism would not change their practices at all. I think most sects of Judaism that mentioned prayers for the rebuilding of the temple would say, instead of please rebuild the temple, it would turn into thank you for rebuilding the temple. Do I think animals would start to be sacrificed? I think Peter would have a field day with us.
It's not an answer, though.
Well,
Ethan question, RDY answer.
Didn't Michael Chabon write all about that in the Yiddish Policeman's Guild?
Yes, which was such a fantastic concept with I'm a huge Michael Chabon fan, and that is the least of his books. Not the ending I was hoping for. But so just for Susan and Jason and Ethan and Barack, the Yiddish Policemen's Union conceptualizes that instead of getting Palestine as a state for the Jewish people to live, it's Alaska becomes the Jewish state. And the language is very Yiddishized. So they use Yiddish words to refer to everyday things. And the plot is loosely based on a group of people using nefarious means to try and bring about the third temple.
In Alaska?
In Alaska.
In Alaska.
I bet
Because
there's
that's
a
where
lot
you
of
build the
like,
third
please.
temple.
I bet there's a lot of like, please put your sweater on. I'm freezing.
That would be if it was in Florida.
So, but to go back to Ethan's question, that would get to a very difficult issue, which is if the temple is rebuilt, you would need the Kohanim, the high priest, and the Levites, the priests, to serve the temple. Who gets to decide who those people are? It would be incredibly problematic. I mean, we Jews are notorious for getting along really well and no infighting whatsoever. So I can't envision it would be a problem whatsoever. So that is part of the problem, just to decide who would get to make the sacrifices. And then going back to the Yiddish Policemen's Union, you have the issue that you need a red heifer, a pure heifer, to be sacrificed in order to anoint the priest. So even if you're able to build the temple, that is only the next step in a much greater challenge in order to bring back the performance of ritual sacrifice.
Plus the performance of the Yom Kippur ritual, where the high priest goes into the chamber of the Holy of Holies and pronounces the ineffable name that only he knew. Well, who knows it now?
I don't know if I mentioned it before, but that red heifer was a storyline in a TV show called Touch. And that was like a primary piece. And it didn't seem like it was a Jewish show, but as the episodes went on, that was like a main piece, was about getting the red heifer for restarting classic rabbinic.
There was a show called Dig that did the same thing, like a mini series. It did the same kind of thing. It was terrible.
Touch was very good.
But in the Chabon book, the red heifer just ends up being a red herring. I'll see myself out.
Although in true Simpsons fashion, they did visit Israel. It was mostly Homer and Ned. And I believe Homer, during the visit, suffered from messianic syndrome.
What is messianic? Oh, where he believed he
was the Messiah.
Of course.
So not one of their best episodes, but I was glad that they finally visited the state of Israel, because in typical Simpsons fashion, wherever they visit, ultimately they're banned from.
You know, going back to this, I keep going back to the idea of Simpsons as this rabbinic Judaism portion of our history. And I think that it does play very well of like commentary on what's happening at that point of real life. And does the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah does that. It's a lot of commentary on, you can correct me, but right, of Judaism. And so Simpsons being a commentary on life or previous sitcoms, I feel has a really nice pairing. No?
So you're right. Absolutely, Brock. It does have a wonderful parallel. And in addition to that, so the Bible was written at a time of nationhood. So when the Israelites had their own nation, they were a powerful people. They were conquered, they became a nation again. So they had a military, they had ambitions. The Mishnah and the Talmud and rabbinic Judaism was written at a time where Judaism was powerless. And so it tended to embody ideals and ethics that don't necessarily translate when you have a modern state, modern people, a modern military, and things like that. And so when we look at it, we also have to understand the context of which it evolved. Much like something like The Simpsons, the TV shows, it was inspired by the TV shows and movies and cultural phenomenon. It was parodying. I mean, they talk about to this day all the things The Simpsons predicts. And you go back to the writers who are like, we were just making stuff up. We don't know how that became true. It was just, we're throwing stuff against the wall and it seemed funny to us. And so being in the writer's room, whether it's the Mishnah or for The Simpsons, you realize it's very immediate. And one of the challenges the writers talk about in various interviews is from writing it to seeing it on the screen is about 8 months. From the moment they write the script to the moment that it's then agreed upon, finalized, then taken to, I believe, South Korea, where they used to ink it and now they do it in computers, to where it actually appears on the television is 8 months. And so they have no idea if it's going to be relevant anymore. And so imagine going back to some of these early rabbis and to say, your arguments still have meaning today, they would probably be blown away.
Are there any parts of the Mishnah that people believe were like more foretelling than just commentary? Like, how would they know that this would be like The Simpsons have all these really mind-boggling future guesses? Like, is there anything like that in the Mishnah?
I actually heard with someone talking about this from a page of the Talmud a few weeks ago. So there's a practice called Daf Yomi where you study one page of Talmud every day. And by the end of 7.5 years, you've read the entire Talmud. So I participate in a Daf Yomi program, and I have some colleagues and friends who get together once a week to discuss like the week's pages. And we were talking about a page from maybe about a week and a half ago where someone is trying to betroth the woman by giving her dates as a payment, and she eats one right away. So is it still the payment if she's eating it? And is she still considered betrothed to him if she's eating it? And so apparently like the classic explanation of this is, nah, just ignore it. It's just too rare. That would never happen. So just kind of accept that they're just really reaching. And then someone said, well, imagine this woman who's so poor and so hungry that as soon as she has a date in her hand, she has to eat it. Maybe she's not sure if she's going to actually be able to keep it unless she consumes it. Maybe she hasn't eaten in a long enough time that she can't control herself and has to eat this date. And so maybe these rabbis who wrote this stuff were even more prescient than they realized. Or maybe it comes back around to where like the classic teaching misses the point so far afield that here's this friend of mine who says, hey, imagine this woman who's bringing us back to maybe what the original writers actually thought. So maybe that idea of relevance, maybe it comes in waves.
I know we talked about Krusty the Clown, and I know there's other Jewish characters on Simpsons, so I think it would be remiss not to mention some of those. But I did a quick Google search. I didn't know Duffman is Jewish, apparently.
The beer guy?
Beer guy. And they even do an episode about him losing his job.
Really?
Why did he lose?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
An alcoholic?
Yeah.
I think there was a different beer company.
This goes back to the sort of the larger story of The Simpsons, as it's been around so long that they have to mine the background characters to give them stories. So comic book guy gets several stories, actually. But yeah, Duffman gets one too.
Is this where Star Wars got it from? Was from The Simpsons?
Absolutely. Well, Mark Hamill made an appearance.
Of course he did.
Of course he did.
At this point,
as Luke or as the Joker?
He made an appearance as Mark Hamill and as Luke. So he had to portray himself as Luke. And he ends up saving some people when there's a riot at a comic book convention.
His Joker is so much better than Luke.
Absolutely.
Already, White. Ethan's got a pretty heavy stare at you right now.
it's fine.
Okay.
Well, imagine if Luke turned evil, became a Sith, and started to sound like the Joker.
Right?
Fun.
That I would pay to see.
I thought that's what was going to happen in the sequels. I thought we were going to learn that Luke was evil.
That was a missed opportunity.
It really was. My ending was better.
So was mine, but we'll compare notes later.
What other Jewish characters on The Simpsons?
It says the Chalmers. What is the Gary Chalmers?
Chalmers is the superintendent.
Oh, that's right. Superintendent Chalmers.
Yeah.
Dolph, one of the Bart's bully friends with the hair in front of his face. It says Kent Brockman is Jewish.
Really?
Reporter
Okay.
Kent Brockman. Yeah. There's a whole page. There's a lot of, some of these are guest characters who are Jewish, like Mel Brooks, Jewish. So his Simpsons character, Jewish. But yeah, there's a fair amount here.
And that was another thing that they helped, they weren't the first to do, but helped revolutionize, is bringing in the guest actor. And sometimes they would give them great roles, and sometimes it would be completely ancillary, and you were just wondering why on earth they agreed to participate. But there was a time where anyone who was anyone, in order to either get their name back into pop culture, just show how important they were, wanted to be a guest on The Simpsons. I mean, I remember Johnny Carson, late great Johnny Carson. He was one of the early ones who appeared on the show, and so many more. And you can tell just how much fun most of them had with it.
In interviews with the band, Fish talks about how much fun it was. See, I have Simpsons trivia peripherally.
As long as it's fish related.
That's right.
Any other Mishnah Simpsons connections you got for us?
Well, one I'm going to use in the outro, but the idea is going back to sort of South Park and also Family Guy, this idea that it's become so ubiquitous that we don't even realize how much a part of culture it is. And Simpsons was heavily influenced by Jewish humor. As I mentioned, Jewish writers, many early comics were Jewish stand-up comedians, which is a whole other conversation. But they were also heavily influenced by their experiences growing up in Judaism. So, and it all comes back to, in some ways, as our tradition has evolved, the use of humor as a survival mechanism. And there's even humor in the Mishnah and Talmud. Sometimes one of my favorite stories is there are rabbis arguing that if a bird is flying in the sky and all of a sudden has a heart attack and plops down to the ground, who gets it? And the argument is, well, if the majority lands on one person's property, he gets it. The majority lands on another person's property, the other guy gets it. And then one rabbi says, well, what if it drops dead and lands smack between the property? And for this, he was thrown out of the Sanhedrin. And so I think that's even the rabbi saying, you know what? Even we can be a little ridiculous at times. Even their arguments can go over the top.
Oh, that's great.
I also love how they insult each other. Like they'll say things that are like
the Simpsons or the rabbis.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Talmud will have the rabbis saying things to each other. I'm semi making this up and semi grasping at memory straws. They'll say things like, your head is full of straw. Or when they're talking about marrying someone who meets their status, they'll say like, I don't want someone whose shoe is too big for my feet.
Followed up with like, boom, roasted.
Or I caramba.
Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there ever any opening Bart writing on the chalkboard that were Jewish?
Oh, that is a great question. So I don't know, but I do know as I've seen parodies of it.
That's not real. Is that real? RDY just pulled up a background of Bart writing Hebrew on the chalkboard that says, I'll hate Shekatanu, and then like over and over again, which for Jason is a prayer we say on Yom Kippur, which is like many, many lines of things that we're sorry for. That is beautiful. It's not real, and I wish it was.
It's not.
And there's another one out there that I will not count the number of pages left in the Machzor. I don't think that ever was a true Blackboard gag, but
that's very funny.
Considering that rabbinic Judaism has been around for over 2,000 years, it still has a lot to teach us. As Rabbi Hillel famously said, that which is hateful to you, do not do unto others. All the rest is commentary. Or as Homer Simpson said, how is education supposed to make me feel smarter? Besides, every time I learn something new, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain. Remember when I took that home winemaking course and how I forgot to drive? May we all forget how to drive in the pursuit of knowledge.
Can you hear that sound? Yeah. While you were outroing, I thought of an episode where Homer is the project manager for building a church. And the line at the end is something to the effect of, I don't know much about God, but we sure built a nice cage for him.
Yeah. Awesome. Do you so before we head out, I'd love to give you an opportunity if you want to do any shout outs or plugs for anything while we got you here.
So feel free to come check us out at Temple Israel in Omaha, Nebraska on our website. We also have a TikTok account where I have exactly one video, but we'll be producing more very soon.
It's hysterical. You should watch it.
And I can be found throughout social media. I'm just as silly and irreverent on social media as I am on the podcast, and just love to connect with anyone who wants to connect about all things nerd culture. I like to view myself less as a specificist and more just sort of as someone who likes to dabble in all worlds and love to talk about anything that you've heard on the show and anything related to it.
Before we go, this week is Thanksgiving. So just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving when you get together with your families.
Happy Thanksgiving. Woo!
Is there like a good Simpsons Thanksgiving joke?
Give me a couple of minutes and I can get
A couple minutes. All right.
I know we don't have that kind of time. There are a lot of great Simpsons about. I was thinking about the barbecue and the flying pig, but that doesn't really help us.
Right. Awesome. It was such a pleasure to have you here and joining us.
The honor has been mine. I'm so excited and just have enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of Torah Smash. Our fiscal sponsor is Jewish Creativity International. Our theme music was created by Sean Fogel. You can check out Sean's bands and studio work at www.thesleepywest.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find us and is an excellent way to support the podcast. We want to hear from you and continue today's nerdy discussion. Go to torahsmash.com to find where to connect with us online, purchase swag from our store, support us with a donation, find previous episodes, and more. And Why can't Jews watch The Simpsons during Passover? Because of all the dough.
I can't work under these conditions.
In the script, it doesn't say dough. It always says annoyed grunt.
Oh, like a prank call?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yo, do I got a Mishnah over here?